Good morning. It's a beautiful space. This morning I want to lead you in a guided meditation, but I was thinking it would be a good idea to start with talking a little bit about what meditation is and why we do it, so that you can understand when you engage it more fully what you're doing. So, if I, just in the moment, if I were to say what I think meditation is, I think for me, one way to describe it would be to say that it's a way to learn to enjoy the natural vitality, the rich expression of mind. And due to many different causes and conditions, we have experience. We have thoughts and emotions and sensations. And sometimes the mind is intimidating, which is why I think for a lot of people it's just very hard to sit even for a minute without doing something. So how do we work with that? How do we enjoy that? What does that mean? A lot of times we think of enjoyment as just experiencing the things that we want to experience. But we don't have control of what arises in our mind. All kinds of things emerge when we're sitting there, and sometimes I feel like people feel very pummeled by the energy of their own mind and don't know how to work with it. It's hard to let it touch us. It's hard to be touched by our experience, and we contract or we try to put a lid on it. We try to escape it or manipulate it. We kind of get lost in the momentum of our thinking, or on the other hand, we kind of have a subtle sense of wishing that we were someone else, somewhere else, having a different experience. And sometimes I feel that I've thought of that as kind of aggression to this natural energy of the mind. We have so much preference as to how we want to feel, and we have no way we don't have the kind of internal infrastructure to help us engage whatever arises without feeling so intimidated and so uncomfortable with the mind. To me it seems, this people often say, I can hardly sit but for 1 or 2 minutes, just quietly. I think that's something that would really behoove us to explore a little bit and to work with, because once we start looking at the nature of thoughts, the nature of our emotions, just this energy of, this kind of rich energy that arises in our mind, we might find that it's not so solid, that it's changing all the time, and this is very freeing to see. This is very freeing to see that, what we usually shrink from and assume we understand is actually very fluid and just like life is, there's beauty and there's pain and there's destruction and there's creation and it's very rich. So if we don't find a way to be with that, we're always contracted, we're always chasing after and wanting something, or we're always pushing something away. And so we never have this chance to relax and enjoy. So when I say enjoy, I mean it in a very broad sense. For example, something difficult arises in the mind. It's not enjoy like it's a fun kind of enjoyment, but it's enjoy that we're letting life touch us, that we don't have to contract. We don't have to put a lid on it, that we can feel moved, So something like despair can become compassionate, and we can broaden our understanding. When I was doing a long retreat once, I remember at the beginning of my retreat, it was almost as if I would only feel comfortable with about 10% of whatever arose in my experience. And as I practiced more and more, I felt more relaxed inside. It's almost like the struggle becomes exhausted, and then I was able to experience 20% of my mind. When I say my mind, I mean the activity of mind, just the rich, the thoughts and the emotions without getting caught up or feeling like I had to escape my own mind. So, you know, we've talked so much this week about how to relate with people in a sane way. You know, how to extend compassion to others, how to be loving with others, how to be in harmonious relationship with others. But it would make sense too that we have a harmonious relationship with just our own mind, which is really not separate from the world that we experience. Imagine, you know, experience without this exchange we have with the outer world. In a way, when we talk about the mind, what arises in the mind, the thoughts and emotions, in a way that's the object of our awareness, in the same way that the entire world is the object of our awareness. So we have to learn to develop a good relationship with this and to enjoy it. I really think you can say, I could define meditation for myself as enjoyment, which is a good way to talk about it, because a lot of times we sit to practice and we feel it's something we should do, and we sit in a very kind of stiff position. We assume a position like, now I am doing my meditation, or now I'm being spiritual, you know, and it's not natural. But actually what we want to do is just openly allow. And we need to find a way to do that. And that's the infrastructure, the inner infrastructure that meditation provides. You know, we want to learn to just be. That sounds like that's a very sane thing. You know, a lot of times nowadays when I'm flying around and I'm on an airplane, I realize everybody's always having to do something. They're on their cell phones, or they're watching movies, or, you know, reading books, which is a wonderful thing, but you don't often see someone just sitting peacefully and just being present, being awake. Like I know that's another word that I might use to describe what meditation is. Just awake, just being, just enjoying in this broader kind of way. Enjoyment means that it includes whatever arises, that there's not this stress of always wanting and not wanting going on. And that's a very profound and extraordinary experience. And as someone said to me this week, it's really a prerequisite for compassionate action and being a good citizen of this world. That's what it means to me. In another way I might describe it is grace in relationship. Grace in relationship to the mind, grace in relationship to the world that I experience. So in a way, when we start to meditate, you know, we just want to just kind of touch it a little bit, touch our experience, because I think all of us have some, what you might call, undigested experience. You know, like trauma. I think some people have more trauma than other people, but we all have some trauma. Trauma meaning that we've had experiences where we don't know what to do with it. Like when we eat, you know, we know how to ingest and digest and eliminate food. It just comes naturally, but somehow there's something about being human that's not so natural to us when it comes to our own mind, which is fascinating to me. So how do we relate to our experiences? How do we even approach it? Because it can be very intimidating sometimes. So that's what meditation is really for, providing that kind of infrastructure to start to approach it and create a safe and sane way to digest our experience. So in the Tibetan culture, my background is in Tibetan Buddhism, my lineage. It's a horse culture in Tibet. And they have this example they talk about the untamed mind, the mind that gets completely lost in thoughts and doesn't know how to relate to the strong energy of the mind, is like a blind, limbless person sitting on the back of a wild horse. You know, there's no way to rein it in. There's no limbs, and things are completely out of control. So what we want to do, again, is to find a way to kind of calm the mind and tame the mind so that we can actually be with it. So I want to introduce today a powerful meditation. It's called calm abiding. And it's really, we have many, many kinds of meditation in my tradition, in our tradition, the Buddhist tradition. But this one is the most basic of all. So I thought it would be simple and easy to work with today. And we can do a little bit of it, and then we can kind of pull back. And the hard thing is I can't see anybody because it's so bright. But maybe sometime I might just go like this. If somebody has a question or two in between as to how to do this, then we can maybe address a couple of questions, because usually it helps everyone. And then we could go back to it and do a little bit more. I always think it's good to stop meditating when you still want to do more. So do short sessions that are very, very open and focused and engaged. So this meditation I want to introduce to you is called calm abiding, and it focuses the mind, it tames the mind, it kind of gives you some strength in being with your mind. And I want to give you an example of how powerful this is. So I have a friend who was in prison for many years. She was born into a family where she didn't get the guidance that she needed as a child, and didn't get a lot of love from her caregivers, and ended up on the streets, and she ended up abusing drugs and getting herself into a lot of trouble. So she wound up in prison, and in prison again she got into trouble, and so she had to go into solitary confinement. And the day that she was walking toward her cell, she walked past the kitchen, and there was a man working in the kitchen. He was a man from India. And he said to her, if you don't learn how to meditate or work with your mind, you're going to go crazy in there. And she said, I don't know how to meditate. No one's ever taught me. But she says, the one thing I know how to do is count and pace. And he said, okay, then count and pace. And so when she was in her cell, she said that she used to walk, it's a very small cell, and she used to walk from one side of the cell to the other side of the cell all day long. And she would count her footsteps, just keep focused. And then she would do she's very strong because she did so many push-ups and sit-ups, and she used to count them. And she said she did so much walking and counting and pacing in the prison that they used to give her, shoes with a kind of a cardboard on the bottom, because they don't want them to have laces, because they can do some dangerous things to themselves in the solitary. So she would wear out the sole of her shoe every day because she paced so much. So anyways, she kept herself focused. She must be I just think she's such an extraordinary person, such an exemplary person, in fact, and so fierce in her focus that she kept herself sane in that situation for 1.5 years through just focusing on her breath, on what she was doing. So somehow she made it through this fierce strength. So it's kind of this type of focus that we do with this meditation, because the mind just wants to wander. It gets lost in the momentum of thoughts. We start to push away. How do we stay present? How do we keep ourselves present? That's the question with this very basic meditation, calm abiding. So I'm just going to give you some instruction, which is very simple, on how to do this. And then we'll do a little bit of meditation for a while, and then we'll open it up. If somebody has some questions, then we'll address those and we'll go back to it. So we often, when giving instructions, we break it up into 3 parts. The body, what we do with our body, what we do with our speech. And in this case, we don't use speech at all. we focus on the breath. So that will be the speech part. And then how we work with our mind. So in the body, again, the idea is not to assume a position. So all of a sudden, it often happens, I say, okay, let's meditate, and you hear a lot of wrestling in the audience, because people are shifting, which is good, because you're starting to notice how your body is. But we don't want to, again, assume a position of spirituality, tight, like now I'm being spiritual, whereas before I was not paying any attention. We want to have integrity in the posture, we want to be erect, and yet we want to be natural in the way that we're sitting. So for me, this is the most comfortable position for me, so I'm sitting cross-legged, so that works. Sometimes it's very important, I think, and healthy to sit on your seat bones, because it supports the rest of your structure can just kind of naturally float without effort. I notice a lot of times that people kind of either go like this, jut out their head, or kind of press their neck back. So we want to think of that there's a string kind of pulling us up. In a very effortless, if you're sitting on your seat bones, often your head will just rest very naturally on your body. And then the eyes are not grasping at anything. It's just like a very soft vision, just looking down, and with a very gentle gaze. So that's the body. Now you're sitting in a chair, so I would say, try to, again, sit on your seat bones, but you can put your feet, make sure that your feet are touching the ground so that some part of you is really grounded on the earth. And so that's the body. So naturalness, but with integrity. And then for the breath, you can breathe through your mouth or your nose, whatever works for you. Actually, I want to also add that if you need to close your eyes, sometimes I might because of the lights. If you need to close your eyes, that's also fine. And if you get sleepy, you can open them. And if you get distracted, you can close them. And with the breath, you can breathe through your mouth or your nose, and the focus is really going to be on the breath in this practice. So as my friend was counting and pacing and doing push-ups and all that, that was her focus. But for us, we're going to focus on the breath, which is something very natural. And the wonderful thing about focusing on the breath is that we can see if we're holding the breath or we're tight, or if our breath is shallow, and it will begin to relax. And we're always breathing, and it's very natural. And so this is a very non-religious, extremely physical, full practice of embodying who we are, And as for the mind, the most important thing is there's no judgment. And thoughts are going to arise. You can't stop them in any case. And why would you want to? The thoughts are actually not a problem. You don't need to suppress them. You don't need to chase after them. And there's nothing that can possibly arise in your mind that's a problem in this practice. It's our judgment of what we think that makes it problematic. So thoughts are going to arise, and when we start to notice that we get caught up in them, we'll just come back to the breath as our focus. We might notice that there's a little bit of bracing against them. Then we come back to the breath with no judgment. My teacher always says that when the mind spins out and you notice that you're spinning out, it's wonderful. You should rejoice because you are mindful that you're not present, and then you just bring it back. You could get lost forever, but your discernment kicks in and you're aware. And so you can just spend a moment to appreciate that you actually know the difference, and you can come back, and you can come back, and you can come back again, and you don't have to get discouraged. So there's really only joyfulness here. There's no need to ever get hard on yourself. That is not a part of the practice. So just to give you a little story to illustrate this, there was a great meditator named Gampopa, who had a teacher named Marpa. And Gampopa went into a cave to do his meditation. So he was sitting in his cave, and he was a very fervent meditator. And all of a sudden, this won't happen to you, but he got very dizzy, and he started to get, like, everything started to spin, and he was having a lot of obstacles. And he got nauseated, and he started to vomit, and he went blind, and he was having all kinds of hallucinations. So he got very troubled. So he left his cave and went down to see his teacher, Naropa. And Naropa said, "Oh, it's just experience. Don't make a big deal out of it, go back." So he went back. And this time, he had all kinds of, he started to see deities and, lights and rainbows, and he felt completely blissed out. And he got very excited about that. So he ran down the mountain to tell his teacher. And his teacher says, "So what? It's just more experience. Go back and practice." So basically, we're not making some experiences good. We're not making some experiences bad. We're just seeing it all as experience. And that's the beauty of this practice. And when we get lost, we just go back and go back. So this kind of open mind that doesn't judge is how we poise our mind for insight, for wisdom. And we find that kind of strength and clarity and presence of being that's so important to being a human being. How can we live without that? How can we live without that? So I will guide you. I'll ring the gong, and maybe let's do this first. Let's try 10 breaths, just 10. And how I teach people to do this, and people say this is very helpful, is you just have 10 fingers. So each time you have an inhale and then an outhale, you just press one finger into your knee. So when you're inhaling, just feel the whole thing. This is something maybe you work up to. Maybe it's awkward at first, but you breathe in the air. You might even feel the temperature. Like, what does it feel when it comes into your nose, your mouth? Feel it fill up your lungs. Just notice the sensation, and feel your lungs fill up with air. And then once you inhale, there'll be this pause, like this gap. Sometimes I feel for myself that's like a very expansive feeling. And then when that moment, that pause is finished and you're ready to exhale, they often say put a little emphasis on the exhale. And then again, there'll be a little expansive moment. And then inhale again, just very natural. There's not really much to do. The antidote is always just come back to the breath. That's it. It's so simple. So let me guide you through it, and we'll first do 10 breaths. I'll ring the gong, and then if there's any questions, we'll ask questions, and if not, we'll go back to it. Okay? Okay. So again, just breathe in. See if you can feel. Just notice the temperature of the breath. You can feel it on your mouth or in your nostrils coming down into your chest. And then with a long out breath, paying attention to those moments where you pause, that expansive quality. I can actually, even if I don't see you, I can feel that sense of grace that comes from just finding that peaceful, kind of structured peacefulness in doing the meditation. Some kind of elegance comes from it. Anyways, I want to just make sure that no one has any questions about this, and then we'll do a little bit of a longer session. So, did anybody have trouble with 10 breaths? It's good if somebody does, not if somebody does, but if you do, please, say something, and then maybe we can address. Okay, maybe you're all very experienced, more experienced. This is Louisville, so it's a kind of unusual community where people are more contemplative. Anyways, are you up for doing a longer session where I don't interrupt so much? Okay. Okay, I think also it's been a busy week and it feels so amazing just to stop for a minute. Elsie, how long do I have here? Oh, so I go to... Well, that's just one more... Oh, wait, 9:30. Oh, yeah, that's 20 minutes. Are you up for 20 minutes without stopping? Oh, goody. I'd love to do that. 15 minutes. Okay, I'll do 15 minutes. That sounds reasonable. Okay. And then I'll have time to just conclude. Okay. What's that? Yeah, I see that. Okay. 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 Again, if your mind wanders off, don't forget, just joyfully bring it back to your breath, just again and again. Again, if your mind is wandering, bring it back. Use the breath as a support to keep you present. So that's the practice of calm abiding, or as it's called in Sanskrit, shamatha meditation. And it makes you very organized. Can you feel that? I don't know, you might say, for me the word grace always comes up when something has so much integrity and relaxation. And it puts us in a position to relax with the nature of our thoughts and emotions and not get lost with all this contraction and wanting and not wanting, which you might call that stress. So, how do we relax? How do we truly relax? We go on vacations, but the mind never really relaxes. This seems to me very essential to well-being and also to relating to others and evoking compassion. And they say in this tradition that, like if you have a butter lamp, but it's exposed to the elements, it will always be flickering and unstable, and there won't be a lot of brightness or clarity. But if you put a glass around, to protect it, I don't know what those are called, like a glass globe, the flame not only will become stable, but it will become brighter and more luminous. So from here, this is the most foundational meditation that we do. from here we start to kind of explore what is the nature of mind and what is the nature of, our relationship to things. We start to engage it in a different way. We do practices that evoke compassion, that cultivate compassion and loving kindness, sometimes utilizing our thoughts, sometimes utilizing visualizations. And sometimes we do just formless practice that doesn't even have something to rely on, like the breath or an object of focus, but it's just kind of really open, free, liberating experience. So this is, I'm just introducing this one. It's kind of like when you build a house, you have a foundation, and the foundation is cement. It's like it works with the coarsest kind of experiences, and then it provides a good, solid basis for everything else to happen. So I thought this would be a good one to introduce today. And I really appreciate being able to do this practice myself this morning, because it's been so busy, and I usually have more chance to just kind of step aside and just, be, rather than doing so much. But again, I think it's important to remember that, meditation, I don't see meditation as a luxury. Sometimes that comes up. It's like people who meditate are, checking out or withdrawing from reality. I think this is a big part of how we need to practice or pause to even understand who we are. And it's like, if we don't work with our mind, how do we expect to go out into the world and help create sanity there? So, how we work with you can't really separate mind and the world around you. It's like this exchange between our outer and inner world. So for me, meditation is engagement. Sometimes I've done a lot of retreat in my life, and people say, oh, that's just withdrawing from the world. But in fact, when you go into retreat and you sit with your mind, everything you've been trying to avoid by keeping yourself so busy is just right there. So I find that really extremely humorous. But then when you have a way of working with it, it becomes a great joy, and it becomes more and more enjoyable, and your life becomes more, internally organized, and then you're more clear about who you are in relationship to everything else, and it just permeates your experience, and it helps you navigate the world with a lot of sanity and well-being. So anyways, I feel very honored to be here, and this was very enjoyable for me, and thank you for being interested in meditation. So I'll see you all this afternoon. Thank you so much.